In the heart of London, where history meets modernity, Buckingham Palace stood as a symbol of tradition and grandeur. The palace gates were always bustling with activity, tourists snapping photos, families marveling at its beauty, and locals going about their day. Among them was Private James Whittaker, a royal guard known for his unwavering discipline and stoic presence. Dressed in his iconic red tunic and towering bearskin hat, he stood tall outside the palace, a living statue guarding centuries of tradition. Private Whittaker wasn't just any soldier. He had trained rigorously to earn his place among the elite, royal guards. Every movement, every step, and even his posture were perfected through years of practice. His job wasn't just about standing still, it was about representing something bigger than himself: the monarchy, the nation's history, and the values it upheld. To most people, he might have looked like a mannequin, but beneath that calm exterior lay a sharp mind, constantly aware of his surroundings. On this particular evening, the air was crisp, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun began its descent. Tourists flocked to the palace grounds, eager to capture memories before the day ended. Some posed for pictures near the guards, mimicking their rigid stance or pretending to poke them. It was all light-hearted fun, and Whittaker paid no attention. His training taught him to ignore distractions and remain focused on his duty, no matter what happened around him. But not everyone shared the same respect for the guards. A group of young tourists, clearly enjoying themselves a little too much, after a long day of sightseeing, caught Whittaker's peripheral vision. They were loud, laughing uncontrollably and stumbling slightly as they moved closer to the palace gates. From their accents, it was clear they weren't locals. They were visitors from another country, here to experience the wonders of London. At first, they seemed harmless enough, taking turns posing beside Whittaker for silly selfies. However, there was something unsettling about their energy. Their laughter grew louder, almost taunting, as if they saw Whittaker's stillness as an invitation to test his limits. One of them joked, "Bet you can't make him move." Another chimed in, "What if we try?" The group laughed, feeding off each other's excitement. To them, Whittaker wasn't a person with feelings or responsibilities. He was just part of the scenery, a prop in their holiday adventure. As the minutes passed, their antics became bolder. They started leaning on him playfully, pretending to push him over. Some bystanders chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in the amusement or step back. Others exchanged worried glances, sensing that things could spiral out of control. But Whittaker didn't flinch. He remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed ahead, determined not to let anything or anyone break his composure. Little did the group know, their harmless prank was about to take a dangerous turn. Hidden beneath Whittaker's polished uniform was a system designed to handle unexpected situations. Though he appeared frozen in time, his mind was racing. He knew protocol inside and out, and he understood the gravity of his role. If these tourists crossed a line, the consequences would be swift and severe. For now, though, all he could do was wait and hope that reason would prevail. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. The group of tourists, emboldened by their own laughter and the buzz of alcohol, began to lose any sense of restraint. What had started as playful teasing quickly escalated into something far more reckless. One of them, a wiry young man with a mischievous grin, reached into his backpack and pulled out a roll of duct tape. He held it up triumphantly, as if presenting a trophy, and waved it in the air for his friends to see. "Watch this," he said, his voice slurred but tinged with excitement. The others cheered, egging him on without a second thought. At first, it seemed like a joke. The group laughed nervously, glancing around to gauge whether anyone was paying attention. But when no one intervened, their confidence grew. They circled Private Whittaker like predators closing in on their prey, their movements clumsy but deliberate. One of them grabbed Whittaker's arm, pretending to steady themselves, while another began wrapping the duct tape tightly around his wrist. Whittaker didn't resist. He couldn't. His training demanded that he remain motionless, even in the face of such blatant disrespect. The tourists worked quickly, their hands moving with surprising efficiency despite their intoxicated state. Within moments, Whitaker's arms were bound together, pinned against the ornate iron railing behind him. The duct tape crisscrossed over his torso, securing him firmly in place. To an outsider, it might have looked almost comical. A man dressed, in full ceremonial regalia, tied to a pole like a character in a slapstick comedy. But there was nothing funny about what was happening. This wasn't just a prank. It was an act of defiance, a direct challenge to authority and tradition. As the final strip of tape was pressed into place, the group stepped back to admire their handiwork. Their cheers erupted louder than ever, filling the air with a mix of bravado and misplaced pride. They posed for photos, grinning wildly as they struck exaggerated poses beside the helpless guard. Some even mimicked his stoic expression, mocking the very discipline that defined his role. For them, it was all a game, a fleeting moment of rebellion against the rigid rules of the world they had stumbled into. But not everyone shared their amusement. Nearby, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered, watching the scene unfold with growing unease. At first, many had assumed it was part of some organized performance or publicity stunt. After all, London was known for its quirky street acts and unexpected surprises. But as the reality of the situation became clear, murmurs of disapproval began to ripple through the crowd. Parents ushered their children away, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few brave individuals tried to intervene, calling out to the group to stop what they were doing. "This isn't right," one woman shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're hurting him." Hurt, however, wasn't the right word for what Whitaker was feeling. Physically, he was unharmed. The duct tape was tight but not painful. Emotionally, though, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had trained for years to serve his country, to stand as a symbol of honor and resilience. Yet here he was reduced to a prop in someone else's twisted idea of entertainment. Beneath his calm exterior, his mind raced. He knew better than to react, but he also knew that help would come soon. Every royal guard was equipped with a silent alarm system, a failsafe designed for situations exactly like this. All he had to do was wait. For the tourists, the thrill of their prank began to fade as they noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The laughter that once filled the square grew quieter, replaced by awkward silence and disapproving stares. Some members of the group exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that they had crossed a line. But it was too late to turn back now. The damage was done, and the consequences were inevitable. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the air became palpable. Something, or someone, was coming. And when it arrived, the tourists would realize just how serious their actions truly were. As the tourists continued to revel in their misguided prank, unaware of the storm they had set in motion, Private James Whitaker remained as still as ever. Beneath his polished exterior, however, his mind was anything but calm. Years of training had prepared him for moments like this, situations where patience and discipline were tested to their limits. Though he couldn't move or speak, Whitaker wasn't powerless. Hidden within the intricate folds of his uniform was a small, discreet panic button, a lifeline designed for emergencies exactly like this one. With careful precision, Whitaker activated the device. It was a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, but it sent an immediate signal to the command center monitoring all palace activities. The message was clear. Something was wrong at his post. Within seconds, alarms silently blared behind the scenes, alerting not only the nearby squad of royal guards but also higher-ranking officers stationed inside Buckingham Palace. Help was already on its way, though the tourists remained blissfully unaware of the chain reaction they had triggered. Meanwhile, the growing crowd of onlookers began to shift from passive observers to active participants in the unfolding drama. Some people stepped forward, their faces etched with concern, while others pulled out their phones to document the incident. A young woman standing near the front of the crowd raised her voice above the din. "This isn't okay," she shouted, pointing accusingly at the group of pranksters. Her words carried weight, cutting through the nervous energy that hung heavy in the air. Others joined in, voicing their disapproval. "You need to stop this right now," a man added firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. The tourists, who had been so confident just moments earlier, started to falter under the weight of public scrutiny. Their laughter grew quieter, replaced by uneasy glances exchanged between them. The ringleader, the one who had produced the duct tape, tried to brush off the criticism with a forced smile. "Relax, it's just a bit of fun," he said defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. But the crowd wasn't buying it. If anything, their outrage only grew louder. One particularly bold bystander, an older gentleman with a stern expression, stepped closer to the group. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he demanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "This isn't some statue or prop. It's a member of the armed forces. You're messing with something bigger than yourselves." His words struck a nerve, not just with the pranksters, but with everyone watching. For the first time, the gravity of the situation began to sink in, for both the perpetrators and the audience. In the background, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of boots clicking rhythmically against the pavement. The unmistakable cadence of marching feet signaled the arrival of reinforcements. The tourists froze, their bravado crumbling like sandcastles hit by waves. They turned toward the source of the noise, their eyes widening in alarm as they saw what was coming. An entire squad of royal guards moving in perfect unison emerged from around the corner. Their presence was commanding, exuding an aura of authority that silenced the crowd instantly. For Private Whitaker, relief washed over him, though his expression remained unchanged. He knew the cavalry had arrived, and justice would soon follow. To the tourists, however, the sight of the approaching guards was nothing short of terrifying. What had started as a reckless act of mischief was about to become a lesson in accountability, one they wouldn't soon forget. As the squad closed, the pranksters exchanged panicked looks, suddenly realizing the enormity of their mistake. There was no escape now. The consequences were inevitable, and the world would be watching. The arrival of the Royal Guard squad sent shockwaves through the group of tourists, shattering whatever confidence they had left. Their earlier bravado evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The rhythmic clicking of boots against the pavement grew louder with each passing second, a sound that seemed to echo not just in their ears, but in their very souls. It was impossible to ignore the authority radiating from the approaching figures. Each guard moved with precision, their expressions stern and unyielding, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. As the squad formed a tight perimeter around the scene, the commanding officer stepped forward. His voice cut through the tension like a blade, sharp and authoritative. "Stand down," he barked, his tone brooking no argument. The tourists froze, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. For a moment, there was complete silence, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. None of them dared to move or speak. They had gone from being the center of attention for their reckless prank to feeling like small fish caught in an unstoppable net. The commanding officer wasted no time. With swift efficiency, he directed some members of the squad to attend to Private Whitaker while others focused on containing the perpetrators. 2 guards approached Whitaker, their movements deliberate and respectful. One carefully began cutting away the duct tape binding him to the railing, ensuring they didn't cause any discomfort in the process. Another stood nearby, scanning the crowd and keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Whitaker finally allowed himself a brief flicker of relief as he felt the pressure of the tape loosen. Though his face remained impassive, his body language subtly shifted. He straightened up slightly, regaining the dignity that had been momentarily stripped from him. Meanwhile, the tourists were herded together like sheep, their earlier arrogance replaced by sheer panic. The ringleader, the one who had brought out the duct tape, was the first to break under the weight of the moment. "We didn't mean any harm," he blurted out, his voice trembling. "It was just supposed to be fun." But his words fell, flat, drowned out by the gravity of what they had done. One of the guards fixed him with a cold stare, making it clear that excuses wouldn't save them now. The rest of the group followed suit, stammering apologies and trying to explain themselves. A young woman in the group clutched her hands together nervously, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know it was this serious," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Another member of the group muttered something about how they thought it was all part of the experience in London, as if that could somehow justify their actions. But the guards weren't interested in hearing explanations. They were there to restore order and ensure accountability. By now, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the reinforcements. Some people recorded videos on their phones capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. Others simply watched, shaking their heads in disbelief at how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control. Whispers rippled through the crowd. They're going to get into so much trouble. Good thing the guards came when they did. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mix of anger, curiosity, and relief that someone was finally stepping in to handle the chaos. Back at the center of it all, the commanding officer gave a curt nod to signal the next phase of action. Several guards escorted the tourists away from the scene, their arms firmly guiding them toward a waiting vehicle. The pranksters shuffled along reluctantly, heads bowed in shame. As they passed through the crowd, they were met with disapproving glares and muttered comments. "Serves them right," one man said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Another added, "They should have known better." For Private Whitaker, the ordeal wasn't over yet, but he knew the worst was behind him. He exchanged a quick glance with the commanding officer, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity and respect. The message was clear. Justice would be served and the honor of the Royal Guards would be upheld. As the squad prepared to leave the scene, the tourists were loaded into the vehicle, their holiday turned into a nightmare they would never forget. And as the crowd dispersed, whispers of the incident lingered in the air, a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of another ordinary day in London. The scene outside Buckingham Palace was now a flurry of controlled activity. The tourists, once so carefree and full of bravado, were now reduced to nervous wrecks as they sat huddled together in the back of a police van. Their earlier laughter seemed like a distant memory, replaced by trembling hands and downcast eyes. Each one of them knew they had crossed a line, perhaps not fully understanding how serious their actions were at first, but now painfully aware that there would be consequences. As the van door slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate for the moment, the Royal Guards turned their attention to restoring order. Private James Whitaker, finally freed from the duct tape, stood quietly beside his fellow guards. Though his uniform bore faint creases from the prank, he carried himself with renewed dignity. His commanding officer approached him briefly, offering a few words of reassurance. "Good job staying calm," he said, his voice low but firm. "You handled it exactly as you were trained to." Whitaker gave a slight nod, his expression unchanged, though a flicker of gratitude passed through his eyes. Meanwhile, the crowd that had gathered began to disperse slowly, though many lingered, to watch the aftermath unfold. Some people continued recording videos, capturing snippets of interviews with witnesses or close-ups of the Royal Guards still stationed nearby. Social media platforms were already buzzing with posts about the incident. Videos uploaded by onlookers quickly gained traction, accompanied by captions like "Tourists tie up Royal Guard" and "What were they thinking?" The story spread rapidly, drawing reactions from around the world. While some found humor in the absurdity of the situation, most responses were overwhelmingly critical, condemning the tourists' behavior as disrespectful and reckless. Back at the command center, inside Buckingham Palace, officials worked swiftly to address the fallout. Security footage from cameras positioned throughout the palace grounds provided clear evidence of what had transpired. Every detail, the initial teasing, the binding of Private Whitaker, the growing tension among bystanders, was meticulously reviewed. This documentation would prove invaluable when it came time to present the case against the perpetrators. It wasn't just about punishing those responsible. It was about sending a message that such acts of disrespect would not be tolerated. Outside, Scotland Yard officers arrived on the scene to take over the investigation. Clad in their distinctive uniforms, they moved efficiently, gathering statements from witnesses and confiscating phones for potential evidence. One officer knelt beside a young couple who had been filming the entire incident, asking them to describe what they saw. They didn't seem to realize how serious it was, the woman explained. her voice tinged with frustration. It felt like they were treating it like a game. But this is a royal guard we're talking about. The officers nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes before moving on to speak with others. Meanwhile, forensic experts carefully collected the remnants of duct tape left behind at the scene, bagging them as part of the investigation. Every piece of evidence mattered. It painted a clearer picture of the events and ensured that justice would be served fairly and thoroughly. For the tourists, the realization of what awaited them began to sink in. As they sat in silence inside the van, the weight of their actions pressed heavily on their shoulders. The ringleader buried his face in his hands, muttering apologies under his breath, while others stared blankly out the window, watching as the majestic palace faded into the distance. None of them had anticipated this outcome when they woke up that morning, eager to explore London's iconic landmarks. What had started as a day of adventure had spiraled into something far darker, a lesson in accountability that none of them would soon forget. By the time the van pulled away, escorted by additional officers, the area around the palace had returned to its usual state of quiet grandeur. The royal guards resumed their posts, standing tall and resolute as if nothing had happened. But the ripple effects of the incident were undeniable. For Private Whitaker and his comrades, it was a reminder of the importance of their role, not just as protectors of tradition but as symbols of resilience. And for the tourists, it marked the beginning of a long journey toward redemption, one that would require them to face the consequences of their choices and learn a hard lesson about respecting boundaries. The days following the incident at Buckingham Palace were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, public outrage, and soul-searching for everyone involved. For the group of tourists, their reckless prank had spiraled into something far more serious than they could have imagined. Back in custody, they faced hours of questioning by authorities from Scotland Yard. Each member of the group was interviewed, separately, forced to recount their actions in detail. The ringleader, whose idea it had been to use the duct tape, struggled to explain himself. "We thought it was harmless," he repeated over and over, his voice tinged with desperation. But harmless was the last thing their actions had been. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a case of drunken mischief. It was a breach of law and respect. The tourists were formally charged with multiple offenses, including public disorder and assault on a member of the armed forces. These weren't minor infractions. They carried significant penalties, including hefty fines and potential jail time. To make matters worse, their behavior had sparked widespread condemnation both locally and internationally. News outlets picked up the story, airing footage of the incident alongside interviews with experts who emphasized the gravity of disrespecting a royal guard. "These guards are trained professionals," one commentator explained during a televised segment. "They represent centuries of tradition and service. What these individuals did was not only illegal but deeply offensive." For Private James Whitaker, life returned to a semblance of normalcy after the chaos subsided. His superiors praised him for maintaining composure under pressure, reinforcing the importance of discipline in preserving the dignity of the monarchy. In private moments, however, Whitaker allowed himself to reflect on the ordeal. Though he hadn't sustained physical harm, the emotional toll lingered. He thought about the countless hours of training he'd endured, the drills, the sacrifices, the unwavering commitment to duty, and how close it had all come to being undermined by thoughtless actions. Still, he found solace in knowing that his response had upheld the values he stood for. His commanding officer later commended him publicly, calling him a model of restraint and professionalism. Meanwhile, the tourists' home country took notice of the scandal. Embassies were contacted and diplomatic channels buzzed with discussions about the implications of the incident. The group's families were notified, adding another layer of embarrassment and shame. Parents expressed disbelief, struggling to reconcile the carefree travelers they had sent off on holiday with the reckless individuals now facing criminal charges. One mother tearfully told reporters, "This isn't who we raised him to be. I hope he learns from this." The sentiment echoed among many who followed the story. a mix of disappointment, anger, and hope that the perpetrators would grow from their mistakes. Public reaction remained divided but largely critical. Social media threads continued to explode with opinions, ranging from calls for harsh punishment to debates about cultural awareness. Many argued that visiting historic landmarks came with certain responsibilities, particularly when it came to respecting local customs and traditions. Others pointed out that ignorance was no excuse, emphasizing the need for accountability regardless of intent. A popular hashtag, #RespectOurGuard, began trending online, serving as a rallying cry for those who felt strongly about protecting the integrity of national symbols. In court, the tourists appeared visibly shaken, their earlier bravado replaced by remorse. Dressed in plain clothes, they stood before the judge, each offering heartfelt apologies. "I'm so sorry for what I did," said one young woman, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt anyone or disrespect your country. Please, forgive me." Their defense attorney argued for leniency, citing their lack of prior offenses and apparent regret. However, the prosecution countered that leniency might send the wrong message, urging the court to impose penalties that reflected the seriousness of the crime. When the verdict was handed down, it sent shockwaves through the group. Fines totaling tens of thousands of pounds were imposed, along with community service requirements and bans from re-entering the UK for several years. While some viewed the sentence as fair, others believed it didn't go far enough. Regardless, the outcome served as a stark reminder of the consequences of crossing boundaries, both literal and figurative. For Whitaker and his fellow guards, the incident reinforced the importance of vigilance and unity. It also highlighted the resilience of those who dedicate their lives to protecting tradition and honor. As the palace gates closed behind the fading echoes of controversy, one thing was certain: the world would remember this story, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the enduring strength of those who stand watch, steadfast and unyielding, in service of something greater than. The aftermath of the Buckingham Palace incident left a lasting impression on everyone involved, rippling far beyond the immediate consequences faced by the tourists. For Private James Whitaker, it became a defining moment in his career, a test of endurance and discipline that reaffirmed why he had chosen this path in the first place. In the days following the event, he spent time reflecting on what had happened, not just for himself, but also as part of debriefings with his superiors. These sessions were more than procedural. They were opportunities to learn and adapt, ensuring that such incidents could be handled even better in the future. Whitaker's commanding officer addressed the entire squad during one of these meetings, emphasizing how important their roles were, not only as protectors of tradition but as symbols of resilience. "What happened here wasn't just about one guard being targeted," the officer said firmly. "It was an attack on everything we stand for. And yet, because of your training and professionalism, you turned a potentially disastrous situation into a demonstration of strength." The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled over them. Whitaker sat tall, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that while he couldn't control the actions of others, he could always choose how to respond, and his response had made all the difference. For the tourists, the lessons came at a much steeper price. Back home after serving their sentences, they struggled to reintegrate into normal life. News of their antics had spread widely, making headlines not just in London but across international media. Friends distanced themselves, employers hesitated to hire them, and neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The ringleader, once so confident and carefree, found himself grappling with feelings of shame and regret. "I can't believe I thought it was funny," he admitted to a counselor during a mandatory anger management session. "All I wanted was to have fun, but I didn't think about anyone else, or what it really meant." Their story became a cautionary tale told in schools, pubs, and travel forums around the world. Tour guides began incorporating discussions about respecting cultural landmarks into their introductions, using the incident as an example of what not to do when visiting historic sites. Travel blogs and social media influencers chimed in too, urging their followers to approach foreign traditions with sensitivity and awareness. One viral post titled "How Not to Visit Buckingham Palace" garnered millions of views, driving home the importance of understanding boundaries before stepping foot in unfamiliar territory. At Buckingham Palace itself, the incident prompted a review of security protocols. While the royal guards remained steadfast in their duties, additional measures were implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. Surveillance cameras were upgraded, and plainclothes officers were stationed discreetly among crowds to monitor behavior more closely. Public announcements outside the palace gates reminded visitors to respect the guards and refrain from touching or interfering with them. Signs bearing messages like, "These guards are here to protect our heritage, please show respect," were installed in multiple languages, ensuring clarity for international tourists. Despite the challenges posed by the prank, there was also a silver lining: increased public appreciation for the royal guards. People began to see them not just as stoic figures standing silently outside palaces, but as dedicated individuals who sacrificed comfort and personal freedom to uphold centuries-old traditions. Social media campaigns like Arba, Thank You Royal Guards, gained traction, flooding platforms with heartfelt messages of gratitude. Families started teaching their children about the significance of the guards' role, turning visits to Buckingham Palace into moments of education rather than mere photo ops. As weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm outside the palace gates. Tourists continued to flock to the iconic landmark, marveling at its grandeur and snapping photos with the ever-watchful guards. But something had shifted. There was a newfound respect in the air, a recognition of the balance between light-hearted enjoyment and solemn reverence. Parents gently reminded their kids not to mimic the guards or get too close, while travelers approached the site with a deeper understanding of its historical and cultural importance. For Whitaker, the experience solidified his belief in the power of discipline and unity. It reminded him that even in moments of chaos, staying true to one's values could inspire change, not just in oneself, but in others as well. As he stood tall once again outside Buckingham Palace, watching the sun rise over the horizon, he felt proud to be part of something bigger than himself. The incident may have been a dark chapter, but it ultimately strengthened the bond between the guards, the public, and the traditions they all worked together to preserve. In the months that followed the Buckingham Palace incident, the story became more than just a cautionary tale. It transformed into a symbol of resilience, respect, and the enduring power of tradition. The image of Private James Whitaker standing tall despite being bound to a railing lingered in the public consciousness, a testament to the strength of those who dedicate their lives to protecting something greater than themselves. For many, it was a reminder that behind every uniform lies a person with purpose, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to duty. The palace itself seemed to take on a new aura of reverence. Visitors now approached the royal guards with a mix of admiration and solemnity, understanding the weight of history they represented. Children no longer mimicked their stoic poses or poked fun at their immovability. Instead, parents used the opportunity to teach them about the significance of these guardians of tradition. "They're not statues," one father explained to his wide-eyed daughter as she gazed up at a guard. "They're real people doing an important job. We show them respect because they protect our heritage." The tourists involved in the prank, meanwhile, carried their lessons far beyond the courtroom. Their actions had sparked global conversations about cultural sensitivity and accountability, forcing them to confront the impact of their behavior. Some members of the group channeled their regret into positive action, volunteering in community programs aimed at promoting cross-cultural understanding. One young woman even began giving talks at local schools, sharing her experience as a stark example of what happens when boundaries are ignored. "I never wanted this to define me," she admitted during one such presentation. "But if telling my story helps someone else think twice before acting recklessly, then maybe something good can come out of it." Back at Buckingham Palace, the changes implemented in response to the incident proved effective. The upgraded security measures ensured that visitors could enjoy the landmark safely while maintaining the dignity of the royal guards. Plain clothes. Officers blended seamlessly into crowds, offering a subtle yet reassuring presence. Signs reminding tourists to respect the guards became part of the landscape, their messages clear and concise. Even social media played a role, with hashtags like Respect Our Guard continuing to inspire thoughtful discussions online. For Private Whitaker, life settled back into its familiar rhythm, though he felt a renewed sense of pride in his role. He often reflected on how the incident had tested him, not just physically but emotionally, and how it had strengthened his resolve. His fellow guards shared similar sentiments, drawing closer together as a team after weathering the storm. They knew that moments of challenge only reinforced the bonds of camaraderie and purpose that defined them. The palace authorities released a statement thanking the public for their support and reaffirming the importance of respecting cultural symbols. The royal guards are not merely figures in red coats and bearskin hats, the statement read. They are living embodiments of centuries of tradition, service, and sacrifice. To disrespect them is to disrespect the values they represent. The words resonated deeply, echoing across news outlets and social platforms alike. As time passed, the story faded from headlines but remained etched in collective memory, a powerful narrative about consequences, redemption, and the importance of honoring boundaries. Tourists continued to flock to Buckingham Palace, eager to witness its grandeur and pay homage to its storied past. But now, there was a palpable shift in attitude. People smiled warmly at the guards, nodded respectfully, and kept a respectful distance. It was as if the entire world had been reminded of the delicate balance between light-hearted curiosity and profound respect. And so, life went on outside the palace gates, where history and modernity intertwined seamlessly. The sun rose each morning over the iconic building, casting golden light on the guards who stood watch. Private Whitaker, like his comrades, remained steadfast, his posture unyielding, his gaze fixed ahead. To those who passed by, he might have looked the same as always, calm, composed, and resolute. But beneath the surface lay a quiet confidence, born from knowing that he had faced adversity and emerged stronger. In the end, the incident served as a powerful reminder that traditions endure not because they are rigid or unchanging, but because they are upheld by individuals willing to stand firm in the face of challenges. And as long as